Forget your past life. From this day on, you are simply a Dark Angel. Nothing else is of consequence. The chapter is all that matters. The Adeptus Astartes, since their foundings, burgeon with the glories and deeds of their most venerated warriors. Each senior ranking Space Marine earning glories for their chapter, as each of the Angels of Death carves his name in history with the edge of his sword and felling of his malevolent foes. Yet among the most accomplished commanders of the inheritors of the Legiones Astartes, there is one above all whom guards his chapter's deeds with meticulous care and secrecy. The Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, Azrael. Hidden deep within the stone walls of the Dark Angels Fortress Monastery, records exist of the origins of the Supreme Grand Master of the Unforgiven. Guarded closely by the Dark Angels Reclusium, it is said that the boy known as Azrael would be raised on the feral world of Chimeria. At the age of 12, the young boy would be marked for greatness among the headhunter tribes of the icy planet as he hunted the wilds for trophies of prodigious enemies. 24 severed heads of rival warriors adorned stakes at the entrance to Azrael's family lodge, taken from raids and skirmishes against rival tribes. Marked for leadership among his peoples, Azrael would not, however, be destined to lead the feral warbands of his homeworld, and instead be discovered by the roaming first founding chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the Dark Angels. As a recruitment world, ever crucial for the replenishment of their numbers, the chaplains of the First would recognize the young boy's promise as a warrior and draft him into the initiation trials of the chapter. Watching the other neophytes perish during the trials, Azrael alone would be inducted into the 10th Scout Company, the Redeemed. An exceptional warrior above the standards of his peers, his dedication to the chapter's teachings and ideals would be the only trait to exceed his flourishing potential. During an incursion against Eldari raiders within Deanith Secundus, Azrael's initiative and aptitude for command would emerge. As the 3rd, 6th, and 10th Companies fought the Xenos pirates who had ravaged the system's populace for solar decades, the Scout Marines would prove invaluable in rooting out their movements and deployments. For 2 solar weeks, the Xenos would be harried by the Dark Angels and would grow frustrated with the elusive nature of their foe. Yet Azrael would discover a warp gate transporting fresh bands of raiders to the fray. As the scouts slew the Eldari and the sergeants of the company relayed their findings to the Dark Angels force commander, Azrael would surmise that the reconnaissance party's absence would cause the portal to close. Convincing the sergeants of the 10th to lead a charge into the warp gate, the Dark Angels of the Redeemed would traverse to the interior of an Eldari command ship. Disabling the vessel's engines to allow for reinforcements to aid them in their destruction of the craft, the Dark Angels would retrieve the 10th Company from the fray before destroying the Void Ship. Returning to the chapter as honored heroes, Azrael would be awarded his first laurel of victory, one of only 6 ever attained by a Scout Marine in the chapter's 10,000-year history. Many within the Dark Angels would foresee greatness within Azrael, most notably as a candidate for the chaplaincy by virtue of his veneration to the First Legacy and devotion to its creed. Promoted to the rank of a battle brother of the 3rd Battle Company, the Unmerciful, Azrael would earn glory for his chapter through many campaigns until the scouring of Truan 9. Investigating the disappearance of an Adeptus Mechanicus outpost at the edge of the Truan system, the Dark Angels would find only desolate habdomes in a colony absent of 500,000 tech priests. No scars of battle nor bodies showed evidence of war upon the planet's surface, yet as the 3rd Company delved into the caverns of Truan 9, they would find their charge. Corpses of the tech adepts and colony miners lined the tunnels as evidence of a civil war would be apparent. Gripped by a sudden psychic attack from an unknown source, The Dark Angels would be instilled with paranoia at the immaterial demands of subservience and obedience. Resisting the call of the ruinous powers, the Third Company would weather the erosion of their mental stability as bouts of infighting began to arise. Master Baphaeus, commander of the Unmerciful, would lead the company into the ancient tunnels until delving alone into its darkest depths. Ordering Azrael to evacuate his men should Baphaeus not return, the Unmerciful would wait for 2 Terran Standard days without communication from the company master. Disobeying his commander's orders, Azrael would gather his battle brothers to his side, who had staved off the psychic intrusions of their malevolent foe. Finding the fallen members of the command squad within the catacombs of the tunnels, their bodies would bear wounds inflicted by chainsword and bolter fire. Enduring the ever-escalating paranoia instilled by the warp energies at the core of the planet, Azrael would venture alone into the heart of darkness as his companions' resolve faltered. Chanting hymnals and battle prayers to strengthen his resolve, Azrael would reach the origin of the foul warp manipulations. A bloated siren beast would be trapped within a temple, enshrined between the fold of real space and the immaterium. Defending himself from attacks of ethereal tentacles, Azrael's weapons would prove insufficient in destroying the creature's physical form. Surviving the lashes of the being's warp-spawned appendages, Azrael would detonate a brace of melter bombs within the foul temple and resign himself to sacrifice his life to banish the siren. The temple would collapse around Azrael and destroy the warding stones surrounding the beast. Wrenched back into the roiling tides of the warp, the demon would howl with feral anger as Azrael's body would be buried beneath the collapsing architecture. For 3 solar days, Azrael would lay dormant in the tomb of his own making, yet be rescued by his battle brothers of the remaining Third Company. Returning to the Tower of Angels, the Third Company would demand recognition for Azrael's valor, to which the Dark Angels would honor him by promoting him to the ranks of the Elite First Company to become a Knight of the Deathwing. The commanders of the First would watch Azrael's continued service to the chapter with great interest, as his deeds in battle and devotion to the chapter continued to rise. As a member of the Deathwing, Azrael would be seen at the vanguard of battle for several Terran Standard years, and ascend to the rank of Knight Master within the First Company. His leadership and martial prowess beyond any doubt, Azrael would be reassigned to become captain of the Third Company after the death of Baphaeus' successor, Master Ezekiel, at the hands of an Orc warlord. Accepting their prodigal battle brother to lead them into battle, the Third Company would be reinvigorated to fight alongside their stalwart alumnus once more. The Unmerciful would earn glory for many campaigns with Azrael as their commander. Purging the techno-recidivists of Phase 5 and quelling the rebellion of the Nefernus monarchy, Azrael would also avenge the death of Master Ezekiel by slaying the Orc warlord, Gorbaz Ironmaw. Inducted into the inner circle of the Dark Angels, Azrael's insight and keenness to persecute the fallen angels of the chapter would earn him the respect of the senior officers of the chapter. An exemplar of the legacy of Caliban, Azrael would continue to bolster the Dark Angels' glorious deeds for solar decades until the position of Grand Master of the Deathwing would be vacated. Assuming command of the First Company during 917.M41, Azrael's legend would further abound with his slaying of the demonically possessed planetary governor of Cephalagum and exterminatus of the corrupted world. Aiding the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, Naberius, during the Ramiel betrayal during 939.M41, only 2 solar decades after his ascension to the rank of Grand Master of the Deathwing, Azrael's destiny to lead the Dark Angels would begin. Naberius would be slain by the Demon Prince of the Night Lords, the Painted Count. Yet with the aid of Chief Librarian Ezekiel, Azrael would banish the being once known as Gendor Scrivok back into the warp. Recovering the body of Naberius and returning to the rock to be interred within a tomb befitting his service, Azrael had been chosen to assume the mantle of Supreme Grand Master by the will of Naberius. A duty which Azrael would accept with grace and dignity. Accepting his position as the leader of the Dark Angels, Azrael would be presented with the chapter's most sacred symbols of office. The Keeper of the Keys would unlock the vast doorways leading to the Chamber of Passageways, and Azrael would be bestowed the relics of the chapter. The Lion's Helm, once worn in battle by their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, and the Heavenfall Blade, the Sword of Secrets, would be fitting armaments for the newly appointed Lord of the First. Taking the Lion's Wrath Combi Plasma Rifle and the Artificer armor known as the Protector, Azrael would pose a striking figure to any enemy foolish enough to test the might of the Angels of Death. Charged with leading his chapter in their eternal war to destroy the foes of his Imperium, Azrael would also orchestrate the hunt for the remaining fallen angels whom would bring misfortune to the honor of the First. Dubbed the Keeper of the Truth, Azrael would be imparted with the terrible sins of his chapter's legacy, born during the dark days of the Scouring of the Traitors. The guardian of the chapter's terrible secrets, the mysterious Watchers in the Dark, would lead Azrael into the depths of the rock, accompanied by the chapter's inner circle. Beneath the Arch of Truth, Azrael's resolve would be tested by the trials of the mysterious beings. Proven worthy to bear the responsibility of leading the Dark Angels, the Inner Circle would silently salute their new Supreme Grand Master, in recognition to the new dawn of the First. Leading the Unforgiven chapters during the 41st millennium, Azrael would be burdened with the greatest secret of the Dark Angels, hidden within the deepest cells of the rock. Luthor, the once mentor and lieutenant of the Dark Angels Primarch, Lionel Johnson, had been held captive within the Fortress Monastery for over 10,000 years. Interrogated for information pertaining to the betrayal of Caliban and members of the Fallen Angels, Luthor had languished for generations within a stasis field befitting the arch-traitor of the First. Unrepenting in his actions, the Supreme Grand Masters of the Dark Angels had sought to extract confessions from Luthor, without success, for 10 millennia. And now, it would be Azrael's duty to achieve his repentance. Luthor would in his ravings claim that the Lion would one day return and absolve him of his past sins, for unbeknownst to both within the cell, the Lion lay dormant, nearby, within the deepest depths of the rock. Leaving Luthor to rot within his cell, Azrael would lead his chapter with renewed vigor to persecute the fallen angels and purge the enemies of the Imperium. Aiding their might in joint campaigns across the stars, such as the Pandarax campaign, alongside the Grey Knights chapter, the Dark Angels, under the leadership of Azrael, would not waver despite the setbacks and interferences of the Fallen. After years of campaigning, the insidious foe of the Dark Angels, Cypher, would surrender to Azrael in a bid to warn the Supreme Grand Master of a device held in secret within the rock. The Tucholcha engine, a sentient being capable of traversing through both time and space, would be a boon to the Dark Angels should its components be gathered. With Cypher's aid, Azrael would locate the 3 engines of Tucholcha and create a warp rift above the husk of Caliban, with the hopes of preventing the accursed destruction of their homeworld and schism of the Dark Angels. Warned of the disastrous consequences of changing past events by Chief Librarian Ezekiel, Azrael would order the Tucholcha to thwart the fallen angels in their attempt to change the course of history. Across time and space, seemingly at random, Azrael would realize with horror that his actions had been the origin of the fallen scattering across the galaxy during the destruction of Caliban during the 31st millennium. Yet the misfortunes of the Dark Angels would continue during the 41st millennium. The Cicatrix Maledictum, or Great Rift, had spilled across the galaxy and presaged the Fallen's invasion of the Rock. Led by the fallen Demon Prince, Marbas, the renegade angels would breach the rock's defenses and burrow deep within the fortress monastery. Suddenly disappearing almost as soon as they had arrived, Azrael would realize the intent of the Fallen's seemingly insane attack. Luthor had been freed from his prison. Convening an emergency council of the Unforgiven chapters, the Dark Angels librarians would send an astropathic message to summon every descendant of the Lion to muster at the Rock. Yet as the successors of the Dark Angels attempted to traverse the perils of space to rejoin their brethren, another vestige of the 31st millennium would arrive in orbit of the Dark Angels fleet. Roboute Guilliman, the reborn Primarch of the Ultramarines, led an armada of gargantuan scale. The Rock lay battered and broken as the avenging star of the Imperium's past glories loomed overhead. Azrael would surmise that the Avenging Sun had learned of the Dark Angel's fragmentation during the fall of Caliban and ready himself for judgment. Considering firing upon his arbitrators, Azrael would instead allow the Lord of Ultramar to land on the Rock and consider the intent of his arrival. The Indomitus Crusade fleet had not traversed to the Rock to enact censure, but bequeath reinforcements sired from the gene labs of Mars. Primaris Space Marines, created from the genetic materials of Lionel Johnson, would disembark from the vast freighter hulks of the fleet, clad in Calibanite green and the colors of each of the Unforgiven chapters. Roboute Guilliman would convene a war council outlining his campaign to reclaim the stars. Kneeling before the Avenging Sun and complying to his outlines of the updated parameters of the Codex Astartes, the Dark Angels would pledge to serve the renewed Imperium. Accepting their upstart brethren through necessity alone, the Dark Angels would be skeptical of their untested battle brothers. Personally overseeing his new members of the First, Azrael would test the Deathwing Astartes with trials of his own devising and deem the new Primaris Space Marines to be worthy to bear the heraldry of the First. Undergoing the surgeries to become a Primaris Marine, Azrael would endure the agonizing procedures to enable him to cross the Rubicon Primaris. Besieged once more by the forces of chaos, led by Abaddon the Despoiler and the accursed upstart, Vashtor the Archithane, Azrael and his Dark Angels stand defiant against the encroaching forces of the ruinous powers. For the Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson, stirs from his long slumber, and the duty of Azrael shall remain unyielding with the resurgence of his long-suffering chapter. One of the Angels of Death loomed large in the center of the chamber, its ornately hilted sword gripped in two skeletal hands, a yawning black emptiness between the rippling hood of its dark green robe. White wings quivered behind it. "Who do you serve?" it demanded, cutting its sword towards Azrael's midriff. He parried without thought, turning the blade past his thigh. The counterattack was equally instinctual, the top of his blade thrust towards the chest of his adversary. With impossible speed, the Angel of Death blocked the attack and whipped its own sword at his shoulder. Though he parried this latest assault, Azrael gasped as the pain of his recent wounds flared through the muscle of his arm and chest. "Who do you serve?" "The Emperor," Azrael shouted back, stepping aside to avoid an incoming stroke towards his aching chest. "I serve the Emperor." Leaping out of reach, Azrael saw another Angel of Death flow from a second tapestry. It was as if the threads came to life, unraveling and bulging from the canvas, reknitting as a towering apparition. The Grand Master dived between the two wraith-like figures, cutting his sword through the robe of the one on his right, where knees should have been. The Sword of Secrets parted cloth, slicing effortlessly through the thick fabric, but passed on through the robe without meeting resistance. "Who do you serve?" The pair of angels spoke in unison, their wings fluttering with agitation as they turned on the Grand Master and assumed identical poses, with swords pointed at his face. "Mankind," he gasped. "The Space Marines serve mankind." Azrael managed to block one of the swords, but the other struck him in the arm. The long blade left no mortal injury, but at its touch, a numbing chill spread along the limb, deadening it between elbow and fingers. He tried to flex his hand to regain life, backstepping rapidly as a third angel of death manifested itself in the chamber. With the Sword of Secrets in one hand, he stayed in motion, jabbing and feinting, using short and quick steps to keep himself out of harm's way, not allowing the three apparitions to surround him. "Who do you serve?" "The Imperium?" Azrael was tiring quickly, despite his superhuman physiology. The slightest graze of a ghostly blade sent a shiver through him, leeching his strength, wearing down his resolve. The fourth angel of death came at him directly from behind. Azrael threw himself at one of the others to avoid being speared in the back, shoulder-charging the spectre with a roar. Cloth fluttered around him, its touch oddly delicate amidst the fury of battle. And then he slammed into the wall behind, meeting hard stone at full speed. He rebounded and turned, lifted up his weapon in a wild defense to catch the crossguard of a descending blade. "Who do you serve?" Sword-locked with the apparition of the Angel of Death, he stared directly into the fathomless depths beneath its cowl, seeking some light, some indication of what it was, what it wanted of him. The Dark Angels. He pushed all of his strength, dragging his blade free from the entanglement of the ghost sword. "I serve the Dark Angels." As swiftly as they had manifested, the Angels of Death retreated to their banners, becoming one with the woven cloth in seconds. Panting, Azrael regarded them warily, flexing his fingers as life returned. The pain in his shoulder subsided, and his heart slowed from their frantic thrashing. Something had changed, and it took a moment until he saw what it was. Where before, the embroidered figures had held their blades with the point to the ground, they were now upraised. The Angels of Death saluted him. This has been a tale of the great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Azrael remains a resolute and defiant embodiment of the Lion's legacy. Yet with the return of the Primarch of the First Legion, the Lord of Secret's fate remains to be seen. For a new era of the Dark Angels is at hand, and they shall not relent in their duty to preserve humanity. And should the pawns of chaos refuse to repent for their atrocities, the wrath of the Lion and his Angels of Death shall rend them from the galaxy.